Occasionally I get questions about the artists and music and literature that influenced me the most. So I figured a smart thing to do would be to make a series of videos talking about my influences, artists, book series, movies, things that have influenced me to want to draw, to want to keep drawing, things and people who have influenced my style in particular. So we're going to talk about Dave McKean. What sparked this was me looking on Bleeding Cool the other day, and Dave McKean is working on a new book for Dark Horse called Black Dog, The Dreams of Paul Nash. And I guess it's going to be a surrealist, though actually everything he does is very surreal, but it's about Paul Nash, a British painter, who I think is long dead, but it looks incredible. And I'll leave a link to everything I mentioned. I'll leave links in the show notes below. But Black Dog looks really good, and I thought I should talk about him a little bit, because I think I've mentioned him here and there on the channel, but not much. So I'm not gonna give you a biography about him, but I'm gonna focus on how I came across his work, how I came to like his work, and how I feel it's influenced me. And I'm gonna go through a little bit of his library, all the books I have on my shelf over there that I collected that has his mark on it, which I have a lot of his stuff laying around here. If you want to know the details about where he's from and like how old he is, all that sort of stuff, I'll leave a link to his wiki. I'm gonna gloss over that real quick, and then we're gonna jump right into this. Dave McKean, that's what he looks like, is an English illustrator, photographer, comic book artist, graphic designer, filmmaker, and musician. His work incorporates drawing, painting, photography, collage, found objects, digital art, and sculpture. McKean's projects include directing an original feature titled Luna and a book with the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins. He's done way, way more than that, but that's the main blurb on Wikipedia. So that's a little bit on Dave McKean. Again, rest of it is in the show notes if you want all the details of his bibliography and all that stuff. I first came across Dave McKean's work, I believe, in Stephen King's Wizard and Glass. Wizard and Glass is the fourth Dark Tower book. The Dark Tower is a really good series, a very surreal fantasy, post-apocalyptic, gunslinging, ultra dark adventure that you should check out. It's got a huge cult following for good reason. I'm part of it because I started reading it a long time ago. When I started reading it, I think Wizard and Glass had come out about 3 years before, and I waited and read each one after that. But Dave McKean did the art in this book, and I must have been about 13 or 14 when I read this. The first time, maybe 15. I remember thinking the illustrations were super raw, and I thought it was ugly. I thought it was ugly as shit. It looked like he was using a lot of Photoshop layers and collage that way and doing experimentation, which is one of the reasons I admire him the most now as an artist. But here, looking back on it in hindsight, I think this is really beautiful imagery. This is my first encounter with Dave McKean's art. I thought it was terrible at the time. It was different from the other illustrations that I saw in the Dark Tower series, which were more photorealistic, and they read better. They were more understandable, less stylistic. I still love those illustrations. And these illustrations in Wizard and Glass have grown on me. They're not my favorite Dave McKean illustrations, but that was the first time I was introduced to him. The second encounter I had with McKean's work, when I really started understanding what made him great and things just started clicking for me, was when I started reading The Sandman. Here's volume 7, Brief Lives. If you haven't read Sandman yet or don't know what it is, just look in the show notes below. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I talk about it all the time on the show. It's my all-time favorite comic book series. But he did this, he worked on this with Gaiman, did all the cover art. Here's the kind of stuff he was doing for the Sandman covers. Like this. It was insane. I mean, this is late 80s, and it's still, I think, way ahead of its time. Very experimental and risky, because when you have a cover that looks like this and it's sitting on the shelf, it's not like Batman punching someone in the face. You look at that and you're wondering what the fuck is going on. But he brought I don't know how else to put it, but he brought like a fine art aspect to comic books and comic book covers in particular. He would put like photo manipulations and stuff on these covers. He put photo manipulations and collages, and he treated it as if he just had a canvas and he was going to put it up in a gallery somewhere. And that kind of sensibility, I think that sort of attention worked really well with what Gaiman and the rest of the team were doing on this project. Mixing literature, things that would be considered high art, and very experimental storytelling into a comic book, into a format that people considered, I guess traditionally considered it childish or kind of too lighthearted to be taken seriously. If I had to describe McKean's work, I'm just going to show a few images. Seeing his stuff, I think, is the best way to kind of understand. Like, words are going to kind of fail me when you're talking about visual art, the best thing to do is just look at it. I really admire his ability to experiment with his style, with other styles, and layering things that don't seem like they should be together, like making he'll actually make, I forget what Sandman cover it was, but he's done things where he'll take a sculpture, he'll make like a cabinet and 3D sculptures made out of clay and plastic and hair and whatever, and kind of layer them in real life and take pictures of them and then paint on top of that. That's the kind of stuff I admire. And that's what makes his work super unique, and why it will be very difficult to replicate it, because that's what he does. And even when it's broken down to just ink and pencil, I really love his style when he does that too. When things are flat on his drawings, they still look like they're kind of vibrating to me in space. Like you can see them as if they're moving, or as if they might turn into a sculpture all of a sudden, or a painting, or some kind of blob. Just even on a technical level, I love how he draws like the folds in people's faces, and their hands always seem kind of they seem kind of flimsy and floppy, like they're made out of paper and they could just be gliding and then fill up with air every once in a while. I love it. It's just great stuff, his style. I really like Dave McKean's work, but it's very hard to talk about it and describe what's happening visually. And since it's so hard to describe, we're just gonna go through my library of stuff that I have that Dave McKean has worked on, so that you can see more clearly what I've been talking about. Here are the different books I found laying around on my shelf that have Dave McKean's touch on them. So we're just gonna go through these one by one, take a little quick look. And again, these will be in the show notes if you want to check them out. We already talked about this one a bit, but Stephen King, Dark Tower, Widget and Glass. What I like most about this is these little pen sketches that he put at the beginning of the chapters, like this, drawing of the Dark Tower. Super scratchy and direct, but it's just, I don't know why I like those little drawings so much. I like them better than these finished photo manipulation sketches. Sorry, photo manipulated finished illustrations. Here's another one. Okay, this is big. This is a huge one. Arkham Asylum, Serious House on Serious Earth, written by Grant Morrison. The video games were inspired by this book, but this thing came out, I think, in '89. Let's double check when the first printing was. Yeah, oh, fuck, spot on. Yes. '89, written by Grant Morrison, an excellent author, excellent writer of comics. You should check his stuff out if you haven't read any Grant Morrison. But this might be, alongside The Dark Knight Returns, one of my favorite Batman stories. It might be right alongside. But this is Dave McKean at his best. It's like when you put him in a situation and tell Dave McKean to do what he wants, then you get shit like this. And this is a Batman comic. DC allowed them to create this. I think it's incredible that the editorial team then had enough faith to allow these creators to make stuff like this, because it directly influences comics, and I would argue all fiction and film right now. What's unique about this book is that McKean did all the interiors. It's rare. But real quick, this book is about Batman getting trapped in the Arkham Asylum with a bunch of villains, and he has to last in there for 24 hours, and then they're going to let him go. Or at least that's what they say. But I'm not going to spoil it. The art is incredible. Painting, experimentation with graphite ink, really whatever McKean could get his hands on, it seemed like he used it on this. And yeah, you see the result. Fucking amazing. The Sandman, I think we covered this, but Dave McKean did the covers for Sandman. I think he did the majority of them. I'm not sure if he did all, but I think he was also responsible for these bios and little drawings at the end of the trade paperbacks as well. But very experimental, influential covers, things like this. Things like this on the cover of a comic book. You still don't get shit like this. Let's see if I can find another one. Oh, yeah. Okay, this is Season of Mists, and this is volume 4, so maybe 2 years before that other book I was showing you. Let's see some of the covers in this one. Okay, there we go. I'd bet any amount of money that McKean was responsible for these, but things like this, I don't even remember what was happening in this volume, in which the Lord of Dreams makes preparations to visit the realms infernal. Farewells are said, a toast is drunk, and in hell the adversary makes certain preparations of his own. Such a weird series, man. Look at this. Page 1, some dude getting impaled in hell. I think, alright, this might have been the one where, yeah, where Morpheus is given the keys to hell and he hates it. Yeah. Okay. Just even looking at this now, it makes me want to reread The Sandman. While we're on the subject of The Sandman, we got to talk a little bit about Overture. J.H. Williams III did the interiors for Overture, which is the most recent Sandman volume that kind of connects the whole series together by, it's a prequel. But McKean did the covers, and it's probably some of his best comic book cover work. Because, I mean, this is him at his best. He's doing stuff that's it's like legible, it's eye-catching, even though I think it would work well as a canvas or something like that. It's still very unique and stylish, and it fits the Sandman aesthetic. Oh, this is awesome. It's a little feature by McKean talking about constructing comic book covers. I'm going to read a little bit of this. He says, I don't like looking back at the work I did last year, let alone a series that started 25 years ago. So revisiting the past for these Sandman Overture covers has been a rather daunting experience. I did the original covers over a 6-year period, when they functioned very much like a monthly diary entry. When I look at them now, I remember where I did them, the music I was listening to, the influences I was absorbing, the various conversations with Neil around each storyline, and the other work I was doing at the time. They were done without expectations, fear, or much of a master plan. I responded to Neil's story outlines and did whatever I fancied doing at that moment. I had no editorial input, art direction, or guidance. After the first year, I didn't even do roughs, and the only imposition was that of a Vertigo design sidebar that appeared about halfway through the run. So that's an example of the freedom that DC Vertigo gave this guy to create stuff like this. And you see the result. Oh wow, he has a lot more written in here. Okay, here's just... I added some tissue paper and Chinese paper details that included embedded petals. What? He's putting... A little close-up. He's putting layered tissue paper on a painting. I would love to be able to do a fraction of what McKean is capable of. So this is all smudged up, but I bought this book, Celluloid, in a bookstore in Athens, Georgia. Because Fantagraphics published this one. But this is, God, this one has a lot of photo manipulation, but also, it's kind of like those Sandman covers, like what we were just talking about. McKean went in on this and did exactly what he wanted. Yeah, this is erotica. It is the most beautiful kind of erotica you can get. But yeah, if you're under 18, like, you know, just don't buy this shit and then have your mom yell at you about it, because I told you. But yeah, great art, even if you're not into comic book porn. Fucking beautiful stuff. Okay, we're gonna go to the middle, at random, to see what comes up. Okay, that's kind of tasteful. Guess what these two are gonna be doing? The last book we're gonna talk about is Cages, which is, this thing is heavy. This thing, okay, how many pages is in this? This is much like Celluloid, in the sense that he wrote and created all of this straight from his head, which is kind of rare for him. He doesn't do that very often. But okay, it's got 500 pages in it. I've gotten maybe like 10% through this book. I don't really understand it. It's very dense. Okay, it's from 1990 to 2010 he made this. I don't know who published it. Dark Horse. Dark Horse published this. The same company that's going to work with him on this book, Black Dog, that's coming out. The narrative kind of jumps around. And I want to take another crack at this at some point. But visually, you can see this one looks like it went through Photoshop. Kind of got burned through. But yeah, great inks. More experimentation. I'll definitely be doing a read through of this at some point. Maybe, yeah, now that I've told you guys that I haven't read it, I feel like I need to. Cages. So there you have it. And that's just a small taste of what Dave McKean has done. You'll see him popping up every now and again, directing his own films, working on dramas that will end up on TV and things like that. So Dave McKean's work has influenced me style-wise. If you see the way I draw people sometimes, where I don't really care too much how, if their face or a head looks photorealistic, and I kind of smash a nose somewhere, or make their hands kind of super elongated and flat, and like the joints are super sharp or broken. Dave McKean directly influenced that. You take little bits of people whose work you like, and then you'll use something like, oh, I like how he draws his knees super sharp, like they're about to cut somebody. I'll just take that and use it for my own stuff. So he's affected me stylistically, also the experimentation, and like I said in that Sandman thing I read out of that book, his willingness to do whatever he wants. And if he wants to put a piece of tissue on his painting, or if he wants to make a video one week and go into music the next week, that's something that he does. And I want to do things like that. If I could spark a remote interest in any of you to go check out McKean's work, I feel like I've done a good thing here. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video, if you want to see more things like this in terms of artists that have influenced me. Check out McKean's work. Go support him. He's a great, great artist. Read Sandman, and I'll see you next time.